Today on the bench I have a tried and true Ingersoll-Rand 2235TiMax half-inch drive air impact. The customer states that when he starts to use this and depresses the trigger, the direction buttons back out and then it just starts blowing air and loses power. I've never heard of that problem before. Let's plug it in and see if we can replicate it.
I didn't say anything about that thunderclap the other night either.
But they really got to you, huh?
Yes, it did.
Gotta work through that for a while.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I've never been in a war situation, but man, that's the closest thing to a bomb I ever heard.
You've heard thunder before.
Not like that.
Yes, you have.
No, I haven't. Not like that. That scared the out of me. Literally, I was my brains out the rest of the night.
Well, that didn't yield anything because I can't replicate the problem. It seems that even with pressure on there, even just nudging those buttons, they seem pretty solid. So it might just be something that he experiences under load. What I suspect is that in here is a reverse valve, and the reverse valve looks exactly like this. And there's a little rack type such situation here where you have these teeth on this valve, and then the direction buttons are also toothed, and when you push those, you rotate this valve, and that determines the direction that the rotor goes, depending on how it ports the air up and through the rotor housing. That's really the only thing that the buttons are dependent on, is the valve. So we'll disassemble this to get access to that valve and those buttons, and we'll see what condition they're in. That means we have to take apart everything in the top side of this unit. So hammer housing has to come off. We have to remove the rotor and also the air inlet. So everything's got to come out just to get at that valve because it's buried way in there, and it has to get punched out through the handle and come out the bottom. So everything's got to come apart in this. So it's a bit of work just to get to that valve, and when we're there, we'll see what we find. If you've seen my air tool repair videos before, say it with me now. First step is to remove these body screws. It takes a T25 Torx driver to get at those. These body screws go all the way through the body into the hammer housing and hold this whole assembly together. Keep this on a horizontal surface so the parts don't fall out. Remove the hammer housing. Note there is a gasket here, so hang on to that. The hammer assembly is then exposed, and that just pulls off the spline drive there. Now you've exposed the rotor assembly. Remove the body screws too, so you don't lose those. And this whole assembly just pushes out from the back. Nothing holds that in. And it exposes that valve there. But to get that out, we got to push it down through the handle. So we still have to keep disassembling things. Next to come out is the air inlet assembly. And there's tabs that are accessible through slots in the handle here and here. Those tabs need to be depressed and forced downward to hold them in place until you get both of them secured out of the way, and then you can pull this whole air inlet assembly out. Oh, come on. That clicking sound is the other tab working its way back. So when you get one work to the right spot, then the other one, unfortunately, oftentimes slips back. So you just gotta keep trying until you get both of them where they need to be. Then with a pair of pliers, just pull the assembly out. Oh. The tab worked itself back. I didn't hear it. Okay. Ingersoll does make a tool for this, but I'm not going to buy the right tool for the job. What I'll do now is I'll take this over to the vise, clamp that, and that way I'll be able to keep some tension on this while I work out both tabs. Be right back. Here's the complete air inlet assembly. These were the tabs that we were dealing with there. When you depress that, this is a spring seal, just press that, and you try to push that tab to where it gets hung up on the inside of the handle, and you work one, and then when you turn it around and do the other one pops back into place. So I just took it over to the vise where I clamped the bolster and then worked one side out, and then as I'm pulling tension on this to keep the other side from popping back, I just worked the other side out. Now the trigger comes out, that just pulls straight out because this was being held on by the valve stem on that assembly there. You can see a hook on the end of the trigger stem. That catches on to the valve stem here. And when that's caught like that, not only can you not pull the trigger out, but then when you press the trigger, it actuates the valve. So with that out of the way, this just pulls out. Now we have access to the reverse valve here, but first, the forward and reverse buttons have to come out because they're holding that valve in place. On these, they're held in by tabs that catch onto this little partition between them. So you extend one, push a pocket screwdriver down in there, and then depress that tab so it pops out, and then do the same on the other button. With the buttons out, this valve just pushes down and out through the handle. Now, let's see if there's any issues with this. There are two O-rings. One's a blue one, one's a black one. I believe the blue one is a little bit thinner than the black one. Every version of an impact I've ever seen has this valve in it. So clearly one company just makes a valve and everyone uses it, and it always has the same O-ring configuration. I don't know why one is blue and one is black, but we're going to look here to see if there's any visible issues with it, to see if there's a reason why this would be looser than it should be. We're going to compare it to the other one I showed you. This is one out of another tool, and I'm just going to see if there's any noticeable difference. So just remember, this one is the one that's in the tool working on, this one is the other one. After looking this over as carefully as I can, I don't see an issue with it. So what I'm going to do is I will replace it with this one, give it to my customer at no charge, have him put it through its paces, and see if the problem recurs. Because I don't want to charge him anything if I can't solve the problem or don't at least find what the problem is. So I'll put it all back together again. No charge to him. If this does solve the problem, then I'll charge him for the cost of the used part and labor. And if it does not solve the problem, well, they'll put it back on the bench and see. This way he'll get it back as quickly as possible and hopefully keep his cost to a minimum. We're going to lube up these O-rings before reinserting it. When you reinsert the valve, this square tab here goes towards the rear of the unit, and this just goes up through the handle. You're going to need something long, like a pick or a pocket screwdriver, to push it up and nudge it into place. And it has to be sticking up a little bit, about that much, so we know that that's correct. Now, the alignment of this is really important. That square tab has to line up properly when you put those directional buttons back in. And the way this is going to work is this. Line up a corner of that tab with one side of this square piece back here. See how that's lined up? When you actuate the buttons, it's going to pivot this valve about 45 degrees. So this corner of the tab here lines up with this side of this square piece, and then when it pivots, this corner lines up with this side of the square piece, and that's as far as it's going to travel. So when we put the buttons back in, we're going to test it and make sure that the corner of this tab lines up properly on both sides. That way we know we have it right. It is entirely possible to be off by a tooth or two on this, and then the valve's out of position. So that's how we know we're going to get it right. And put a little bit of lube on the teeth on the buttons too. And see how those corners line up with the sides of that square piece? Now we know we have everything lined up perfectly. So you push the buttons here, in, out, and watch that valve to make sure it lines up properly. Perfect, just the way we want. Next, the air inlet assembly goes back. There is no upside down or right side up. Just make sure that the ears on the retainer clip here, those tabs, go in through the rectangular slots there. And you'll hear it all snap back into place, where you can now see those tab ears sticking back out through those slots. Now the trigger can go back in. Just put a little bit of lube on the O-ring there. And because that valve is now in place, we're just going to push this in, and that hook on the back of the trigger stem will just latch on to the valve stem, and now you can see how that springs back and it's retained in there. The rotor assembly goes back in by making sure that the selector switch is facing rearward, and there is an upside down and right side up to this. Notice how there's this square notch here. That's going to line up with the square pieces I showed you when we aligned the reverse valve. So this goes toward the bottom here, and it lines up. I guess I just wasn't being careful enough lining everything up. This whole assembly recesses in here pretty good, but if you look on edge here, you'll see that the spline drive sticks out about 1/4 of an inch. That is correct. The rear of this unit, where you have the selector switch, is going to be flush with the surface. It does not extend beyond it. So when you look at it like that and you see that this is flush, that is correct. When you put the plate back on, this square opening here goes toward the trigger. Also make sure that the notches for the screws in that housing line up, or rather on the plate, line up with these holes. And when you can see a complete hole through there, you know you got it right. The gasket goes on like so, and when you look at how this gasket is configured, you'll see that there is a tab right down here, right there, and it has to line up with a notch here on the hammer housing. So make sure that that is situated such that the gasket's tab is up against the trigger. And put the hammer assembly back on. That just lines up with the spline drive and sets on like that. And then your hammer housing goes on, lining up the notch that I just told you about with the tab on that gasket. perfectly lined up. The only thing left to do is put the body screws back. All right, because there's a gasket in play here, what do? We tighten the screws progressively and sequentially. I have my driver here that I have in the lowest power setting, and we just tighten down these screws in a crosswise pattern so that we evenly compress that gasket and then increase the power a little bit and do it all again. It's a little frustrating not being able to replicate the problem, but hopefully putting the new valve in there is all this took. I will know more once I hand it back to my customer and have him try it with me watching so I can see exactly what's causing the problem if it does recur. So there might be a part 2 to this video, otherwise I'll consider it case closed. Keep watching the channel because we've got a ton of other stuff coming down the line. I've got a 3/4 inch Matco air impact on the bench. I just finished up a 1-inch Ingersoll air impact. And we have a 1/2 inch Chicago pneumatic impact that has kind of a funny problem. I am sure that the cause of this one will resonate with every mechanic and technician out there. So do me a favor and click down here now to subscribe so you don't miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, use a tool, don't be one.